Welcome to the Quality of Mind podcast, where you can explore the pioneering and game-changing understanding that unlocks the secret sauce to more productivity, peace, and potential. If you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber to personal development and human potential, and if you want to be part of the new breeders of leaders and entrepreneurs, come and explore the before psychology approach, enabling sustainable, wide-ranging transformation in every aspect of life and work, the exponential, not just marginal gains. Get ready to listen fresh and discover your secret sauce. Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. So today's episode, I got another interview lined up with Emily Hawkins, who will introduce herself in a moment. But it's interesting how we connected. It was purely down to an email exchange where Emily emailed me, curious to know a bit more about my show and what I did. I did my best to say, I don't think this is what you'll be interested in, Emily. But she was like, no, I really am. And we realized, actually, we resonate on quite a lot of things in our approaches. And I thought, well, what a great way for listeners to understand a bit more about before psychology and quality of mind, to have a super curious, exploring guest on the show where in real time and see what we think the secret sauce to true business success is. So welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me, Piers, and for actually entertaining the idea of us talking, because we are definitely coming at this from, it's like we're from the same family, but maybe we're cousins or something.
Right. Great. Nice to meet you, cousin Emily. Emily, can you give listeners just a couple of minutes, just a little bit of your background and context, and then we'll get into the nub of the topic?
Sure. So I spent 15 years in the corporate world, streamlining processes and people. I have a degree in supply chain, which is also streamlining processes and people and saving money for large organizations. And I ended up getting an MBA in global business. And I'm mentioning all these things because this is how I was raised, that you take these classes, you get these certifications, and then you go out into the world and you make money, and this is what you do, and this is all there is. Like, this is it. In fact, I left school thinking that I was done learning, which makes me laugh now, but at the time, that's how it was. Well, just like everything, things shift and change and all of that. And what I found most was when I let go of all of that and actually just trusted more of an internal voice. That's when everything exploded for me in terms of truly connecting with other people, truly finding success in what I did and helping others find that success. And now I help businesses, mainly blue collar and small businesses, find that success. And it doesn't come with a degree, and it doesn't come with a certification. And usually there aren't step 1, step 2, step 3 things involved.
Yeah, great. So you're now working with small businesses who tend to work in, as you say, the blue collar, so that it's not highly academic or highly technical. It's down to earth businesses, and you're helping those businesses and those business leaders unlock what I would call their secret sauce so they can flourish more. And that's a beautiful thing to do, because when you can see people really come into their own flow, everything takes off. And that's because of what they've seen and what they've been pointing to, rather than what they thought they needed to be. So that sounds, very similar to myself in that respect. Great. That's brilliant. And people to know from the part of the world you're in, near Atlanta in the US, is that right?
Yes. I live just north of Atlanta, slightly, in a city called Cumming. We're pretty small. But yeah, that's where I live in the US.
Brilliant. Well, it helps the global nature of quality of mind. So welcome. So let's get into it, Emily. So I guess the question we could start with, and then we can pull it apart from there, is what do we now see as at the nub of anyone being able to have a successful business and achieve that success and achievement in a way that has an element of kind of joy and ease? I'm not saying that business is easy, but it doesn't burn them out, and that they can love what they do as well as be successful. what do we think's at the nub of that compared to what people might think or believe is necessary for that? So at a broad level, how would you answer that question? And then we're kind of trying to pull it apart a bit.
If you are on social media in any form right now, it is so step driven. It is so these larger names of people, Grant Cardone or something like that, not to say anything bad about any of these organizations, but it's very much invest in this, you will get this, you will find the success of your dreams and drive the car and make the money and have the happiness. I don't know. It just feels very like do this thing and this is what you get.
Mm,
And what I think is interesting is that the majority of us are like, oh my gosh, yes, right? Like, if I could order Amazon success, like, wouldn't we all? Like, yes, please. In fact, I'm going to order two because I'm going to order one for my husband too. Sounds great.
yeah.
Uh, but that's not how life works. It's, don't get me wrong. I think when you work with coaches and things like that, that you can have success. But here's the main spoiler: that coach is not the success. You are.
Hmm.
And I truly believe that I'm going to save you thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars by saying that authenticity and tapping into who you innately are is really the secret sauce.
Right.
But
Right.
it's getting there that's hard, right?
Well, I think there's a really important thing to explore here, which is just, I love the way you described it. The secret sauce isn't all those steps and tools and all that kind of stuff. It's an understanding innately who you are. Now, that phrase to me has changed quite dramatically in what I think that means over the last 25 years. So before I give you my little take on that, although you probably know, when you say to understand innately who you truly are, what do you mean when you say that sentence?
I believe that this is my take on life, that I was put on this earth. And when I say I mean any of us, to figure out what our gifts and talents are and
Uh-huh.
to share them. But we came not as like the skin that we're in and all of those things. We came here as, you can use whatever words you want, spiritual beings, whatever. And I believe this is a school and we're
Mhm.
all learning.
Mhm.
And every day we're discovering different tools and tricks and things that we have innately in us. And I think that's, to me, the most exciting thing. And so when you say that, I'm like, well, I mean, I feel like this is a series of becoming.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think we stop becoming until we leave this planet potentially. And I don't even know after that, maybe, we
Mm.
continue to become in a completely different way. But I think that's why I laugh at my degrees, because I'm like, that's a thing that I did. But I can tell you in those scenarios, I didn't become anything. I became somebody that could regurgitate information, maybe, but truly living into my gifts and talents and discovering those on a daily basis and feeling what feels authentically real and right to me, that's exciting. And that's
Okay.
really,
Yeah. Now, I'm going to agree with you and go a little further. So I'm going to agree with you in what you've just said and say that that to me is like a symptom or an implication of what happens when we truly understand what we are. So that kind of learning that life is almost, you could call it, it's a school, it's trial and error, it's the richness of the highs and lows, it's finding then what brings you alive and you find inspiring and love and all that sort of aliveness that's available. That is what we innately are. But I think we have to understand something even more fundamental about what we innately are in order for that to come online in a organic and innate way rather than in a contrived way where you try to be that person that's always inspired and positive and hey, look at me, because a lot of people sense that there is that capacity we have to be truly living our authentic self in alignment with just our purpose, passion, learnings, that is available, right? You can see people in that and you can feel that in people. And that's when business success comes along. And then people think, well, how do I have some of that? And they try and reverse engineer it. But I think the problem with reverse engineering it is we're missing one fundamental thing at a realization level. And I was missing this, seeing this clearly as I do now for a good, I guess, probably a good 35 years of my life and a good sort of 10 years of my coaching career. There's something at the very base of understanding what we are that enables what you're saying to come online. And I look at that and call it the case of mistaken identity. I call it the case of mistaken identity about what we truly think we are because of the way we've been conditioned. Now, as I say that to you, does that make any sense? Just tell me where you're at, because you might be echoing what listeners are thinking, or you might be already further ahead. So tell me where you're at.
So here's where my thought is, and I feel like you're talking about me personally. Like you just hit like so many things for me. When I was in the corporate world, great example. I had what I considered great leadership. I had several bosses throughout my career that I just thought were phenomenal leaders. So back to what you just said, I want to be a leader. I'm going to reverse engineer what they do, and I'm going to emulate what they do. And I will tell you right now that felt so flat because it wasn't authentically me. Now, was I doing the steps? Was I sending the same kind of emails? Was I saying the same kind of phrases? Yes. But because it wasn't authentically who I was, it wasn't resonating with anyone. It was like just falling flat. And I had a revolving door of employees for the longest time because I was just like, why good help is hard to find? Like I said all those things. And I had a moment where I said to myself, okay, who do I want on this team? And I made this list that I felt like was this amazing list of what like the dream employee would be. I was really excited about it. And then I looked at it and I had a bit of an awakening because I realized when I looked at this list, if those people showed up, was I the leader to lead them? And I knew my answer was no. I knew that was incorrect.
Okay.
So then going deeper, that's when I started to say, so how would I lead? What does this group of people need? What do I know innately in my heart is how people would resonate? And that's when I changed everything. I did everything pretty much the exact opposite of anything I'd ever been taught. I went through all these steps. I followed the things. I got the degrees and everything felt gray. And then the minute I did things that really warmed my insides and felt like nobody, I don't know who, was saying yes, that's when everything became technicolor. And that's when everything felt like it changed.
Okay. So let's take that, because I think that's a great example of how the difference of how life can feel and be depending on where we're at in what I'm going to call our aperture. So when you were trying to do it compared to how you thought you should be, following the rule book, steps, it was just a bit gray, not really working. Although you were kind of mimicking other things, it wasn't working. And then something came, let's call it through you, with insight and realization and freshness and new perspective, where, as you say, you kind of, oh, wow. And you started to see more about the obviousness of how to lead these people. And that came, as you say, with Technicolor. It came with flow and ease and joy and resourcefulness and resilience. And probably you found people really warm to you then. And off you went. It's like you're in a sailing boat and the wind caught your sails and off you go. Now, I'm sure lots of listeners can go, yeah, I've had moments of both of those, right? And whichever one you're in now. And the key question I love to answer is, well, how come that can happen, but doesn't always, right? So what is it that stops that being more of us more of the time? What you're talking about being in that technicolor, that flow, the wind behind your sails, that more feeling of authenticity rather than trying to mimic the rule book or the step book. And that's what I suppose I've been in my 25 years of coaching. I've been curious about that question. I didn't realize it was quite that question until I look back. But what I found now is it comes back to this, what I've referred to earlier, and regular listeners will know all about, the case of mistaken identity. That's what stops us being more in that flow state that you're talking about. Let me ask you, if I just asked, if you were walking down the street and someone said, tell me who you are, how would you answer?
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I think we like to go to the what, like the tangible answer,
Right.
right?
So you might say, I'm a mum, I'm a leadership
Yes,
coach.
I'm a woman, business
I'm
coach.
this, yeah,
Yes, like
Georgia, yeah.
very logical, where my head goes,
Well, I think when we answer that question, the assumption is you mean the body mind that I'm seeing in front of you right now that was born, in my case, 51 years ago and was called Piers and lived in the UK. That's who I am. And then, oh, yeah, I'm a dad. I'm this and that. So that's what we answer,
yeah,
right? Now, and that's what most people answer, a version of that.
of
Yeah.
course.
Some people might self-identify with their job or their an attribute. Oh, I'm a funny guy, you know, whatever. But anyway,
Mhm.
so, but if you ask the question, if a Martian, an alien from outer space was asking this question and they didn't know anything about us, and they asked the question, what is it about you that is essential and fundamental and never comes and goes? What is it about you that's fundamental and essential and never comes and goes, that is consistent, that is eternal, that is universal? If you look at that question, immediately you go, well, Piers, right? I've been here since the day dot. But then actually, if you go to what I call direct inquiry, now direct inquiry, I've got lots of videos and podcasts on this, Taste of Mango, etc. But in a nutshell, direct inquiry is looking at this very moment of experience, real time, right now, whatever you are doing or whoever you are, right now, looking at that moment of experience without any reference to anything learnt or past or any construct or concept, without reference to anything past or a concept or a concept. And you ask your question, what is it that comes and goes and what is it that stays? You'd have to say, if you do it, and you can do this real time right now, listeners, if you look, the idea of Piers, me, actually is not always there. So maybe for the last 10 minutes, Emily, while we've been chatting, you haven't had an Emily thought. Actually, you might have done because I just asked you the question, who would you be? But before that, right, you wouldn't have even been, there wouldn't be an Emily thought. And then maybe you glance down and look, so your hand, and you, oh, there's Emily's hand. Or maybe you felt the legs on your chair, or you noticed something. But there'd be moments in your experience, in your day-to-day, where there's no Emily. And then there'd be lots of Emily, right? And the same with Piers. There'll be moments where there's no Piers at all. And then Piers comes in. And Piers comes into the system, if you go to direct inquiry, and if you're a Martian doing this, right, an alien, it comes in the form of a perception. So I might see my hand. I might, if I'm in Zoom now, so I can see me on the camera, or what I've been told's me, right? Or I might glance in the mirror. It comes in perception. It comes in a thought because I'm Piers. It comes in a sensation. If I think my body is me, that comes in as, well, that's my body, because I've been told I end at the end of my fingers and the top of my head because I can't feel anything beyond that, right? Well, actually, I can. It's just a different sensing beyond that. But my one perception ends at the end of my fingers. So actually, you realize all of that stuff, the meanness, is not eternal, consistent, and always there. And you know that lovely time in life when we're in flow, when we're doing something we enjoy, maybe a hobby or a sport or chatting to friends or in nature. I don't know what it is for you, Emily, but there'll be times when we're just in flow. People will say, I lost myself in that book or that movie or cooking. I just lost myself. Now, what do you think they mean when they say that? What's going on when they say, I lost myself?
I think it's the back to what you're saying, like
Right.
my that I'm a woman, that I am like this logic sort of, oh, I need to lose weight. Oh, I'm hungry right now. Like that whole like tangible ish or what we consider tangible self that goes away. I feel
Right.
like.
Yeah. And then maybe thoughts appearing about, let's say you love cooking and you just get in flow. There may be a
Mhm.
thought going, oh, I'll put some more salt in here or I'll give that a stir. But it feels like there's no you doing it,
Correct.
right? It just comes through the system. And a lot of sports people will say, I love the Formula One racing, and Ayrton Senna, a very famous driver, used to say God was driving. Well, what he
Oh,
meant was
oh
it was
yeah.
just coming through him, right? And when
Mhm.
people are dancing or singing or laughing with friends, it comes through us. It's less Piers is doing or Emily's doing it. And we can check this out in direct experience any moment through direct inquiry. But then what happens is the self comes in and takes credit for that. Oh, that was me doing the cooking, me doing the great sports thing, or me doing that, because we assume that's what we are. But
Mhm.
actually, at our essence, we are pre the meanness. There's something that is there pre the meanness. Because if we ask, get back to the question, what is it that comes and goes, and what is it that's always there? The idea of a me, a self, appears, a body mind is not always there. It comes and goes. Now, new listeners, you might be thinking, what's this got to do with the secret sauce about having a great business or having a great life? Because you might think, well, that's very abstract or even scientific or even philosophical or even spiritual, or it doesn't matter what you want to call it. The relevance of that piece, the relevance of that piece is that we start to see that there's what we are and what we aren't at our base level. And we start to see that when we stop what I call self-identifying with the me, then something is there that is almost the source of what you were describing when you started to see the world in technicolor, and you started to have these different thoughts. There were still thoughts coming through, but it's almost like, and you redefined what you were in a way. I was like, I'm not the kind of Emily that needs to have all this, and so that was an implication, but it wasn't where it was coming through you rather
Mhm.
than from you. Now, that's just a language difference, but there's a feel difference to those two. And when
Mhm.
we're in flow, we get it more coming through us than from us. And in a nutshell, the short answer for me in why we're not in flow anymore is because we've accidentally been conditioned to think we start at me,
Oh yeah.
right? We start at me. And me then needs to go into the world and work out how to be a better me, right? So and then that might be getting the steps, getting the certificates, getting the education, getting now some of those things in the game of life are useful, of course, right, to have some of those things, but for
Mhm.
authentic joy, happiness, and resilience and creativity, those things all get in the way, because if you strip us back to what we are before the self, and you can have a little tiny taste of what we are before that thinking about me comes in, people will say, well, it just feels calm, expansive, light,
Mhm.
peaceful, but with an aliveness. It's not an inert. It's not like a dark, calm. It's just like this very base kind of level of aliveness. And
Mhm.
actually, here's the thing that's just so fascinating. It's almost too ordinary.
I love that I'm going to interrupt you for a second
Please
because
do. I've been rambling on, so please, yeah.
I find that word in general really fascinating because what's a word that we use a lot? Extraordinary. And what is
Oh
it?
yes.
A lot of ordinary. And
I'm so
that's
with you. I'm so
when
with
we
you.
hit that flow, It is. It's a beautiful, a lot of ordinary. And it's
Yeah.
so peaceful and so calming, in my opinion. And that's the Technicolor piece, is how beautifully ordinary it all is.
Yes. And conditioning has told us that's not enough, or that is not the basis for performance and peace and potential, right? The
Exactly.
self needs to do more or be more.
Mhm.
Was actually, when you're in that let's ordinariness, and before the self has formed in psychology, is it possible to have a problem if you're in that very space before thought?
Mhm.
And we can go there right now. If we just go to that bit before all the thinking comes in, is it possible to have a problem or a future anxiety or a past trauma in that very present now? If you inquire in that, and this is not a test where you intellectually know the answer, you experience this. Anyone, any single one of us right now can experience this. That
Mhm.
in that moment, there is no future or past because time doesn't exist in that moment.
Right.
And the idea of them being an Emily or a Piers that can have a problem doesn't exist.
Mhm.
That comes into the system. So at our base level, in terms of going back to that knowing innately what we are, there is nothing wrong, right? There's nothing right either. It's just it's pre that. Then the avatar me comes in. So I use the phrase avatar, you know, comes in, and as it goes into the game of life, it creates the idea of an it, and then creates the idea of all these things it needs to do in order to be okay, forgetting the okayness is intrinsic.
Yeah, 100%. I have to say that you just saying all of this reminds me of my children.
Yeah.
So I'm raising two dyslexic children. And my daughter, especially, she's 12 now. I could see a huge difference pre-school and when she went to school. She was had no sense of self, free, happy, calm, no problems. We get in school, and because self is now all about how fast you can read, how fast you can learn, all these things, this version of her shows up that's like, I'm not right. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And we have spent the last 6 years unraveling all of that. And if you think about it, it's embracing the difference that they are and who they are versus continuously fighting it,
Yeah.
continuously fighting the environment, extrinsically everything outside of you. It's somebody who's like, I have this thing and I can use it to my advantage. And I'm going to
Yes.
I'm going to make my own game and I'm going to create my own happiness and joy.
You
And
said, I want to just point to something really fundamental about what you said about your daughter and about the difference, because I think this is such a macro point. Any time in life that we suffer, mild or major, or experience a lack of resourcefulness,
Mhm.
is because of one thing. It's because we resist what I'm going to call the isness. And let me unpack that a bit. So, anytime we suffer or experience a lack of resourcefulness, it's because we resist the isness. Now, by the isness, I mean the whatever there is just turning up in thought, feeling, and perception. Now, the only way we can resist the isness, the only mechanism we have to resist, is by self identification. So if we don't self identify, there's no resistance. So the previous Emily, before her kind of awakening, was resisting, or I need to be better at this, I need to get more of this. Oh, I haven't got that yet. So she was seeking or protecting, seeking or protecting, seeking, protecting. And the self-identification with the Emily was causing a resistance to the what is. Now, when you realize, oh, I don't need the isness to be like that, when that clocked for you, the resistance stopped, because the Emily realized it didn't need to be anything, because there wasn't anything fixed to be, right? So that resistance dropped because the self-identification dropped. So if I take it back to the top again, any suffering, mild or major, comes from resistance to the isness. Any resistance comes from self-identification. And the only reason we self-identify is because we've been accidentally, invisibly, innocently conditioned to think we start at me, body, mind, me, Emily, or Piers, born, dies. And when we realize, oh no, we are the bit before that, we are the capacity for the human experience, not the content, there's no self to resist, and therefore we don't have the lack of flow. Now, are you following me with that, or did that sound a little bit jumbled up and complicated?
I'm completely following you. And like I said, I've witnessed it with my own daughter, where there was a lot of fighting it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, what a gift, I mean, she's literally turned it into what a gift, because truly who we are, whatever, whatever we bring with us, our way of thinking and all of that is a gift.
Yeah.
And it is something that we were given as a tool and as something to use. And I truly believe that we're all here to help others. Like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's just your brain is wired differently. That's it. That's all it is. It's just a different wiring of your brain that once she embraced it,
Yeah.
she started to see the gifts of it. And at the school that she goes to, when you're 10, you're in the 5th grade, you have to do an oratorical, some sort of motivational speech.
Okay.
And hers was on how dyslexia made her a better person.
Right. Lovely. Because the resistance stopped, she embraced it, and off she went. And I think that's a great example of when the resistance stops, flow comes through, all that kind of stuff. Now, here's the rub for me, because people can listen to that and go, okay, yeah, I can get on board with accepting dyslexia. I can get on board with accepting it rains a lot in the UK. I can get on board with accepting certain things. But what people tend to have is there's some things that they don't think they can not resist, right?
Yeah.
Let's say an illness or the death of someone, or a turn of events, or should I say a new president, whatever, right? There's something that no, I can't stop resisting that. That's just life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the key thing. When we see that the only thing that causes resistance is the self-identification, there's nothing that we can't not resist. Now, I'm not saying you do that in a kind of, all right, I've got to stop resisting it because I heard it on this podcast. I've got to resisting. I've got to pretend to accept it and almost like resign myself to go, well, it's rubbish, but I've got to accept it, because if I don't accept it, then I'm going to struggle. No. That's pretending. That's just like having thoughts, a mantra. That's positive thinking. That's bypassing. We're not talking that at all. We're talking about, and this is what would happen for you with what you saw and for your daughter, is when there's actually a dissolving of that very self that had the resistance. So it's not then I have to kind of almost resign myself to lower the bar to accept this. It's a new seeing. You see it differently because the very you that was seeing the resistance has dissolved. Because a lot of people think this kind of dropping of resistance is something you have to get the self to do. Now, the self can't drop it, because the self is the one that created it. So when they're told to get over something or get closure or let go, if the self hears that, it will find that very difficult or a real compromise. Like, well, I don't want to forgive that person because they're horrible, or I don't want to put up with that. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about lower your bar and make a concession and a compromise. We're talking about going back to see that the very thing that was causing the narrative to resist doesn't actually exist fundamentally.
100%. You know what this reminds me of? I'm a very visual person.
Right.
The movie The Matrix.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
yes.
when he like goes back in and he sees the Matrix for what it is, and then all the guys like shoot at him, and he puts his hand up, and all the bullets
Drop down. I
stop,
know the
and then
scene.
they
Yeah.
fall. That's what this feels like to me, where you have these bullets, aka these thoughts, these things coming at you. And just like my daughter, like the world, whoever wants to say that this is a problem and you're never going to do these things or whatever. And she's let them penetrate her for years. And all of a sudden she sees that, wait, no, it's not. And she stops them in their tracks, sees them, looks at them, because he actually picks one of the bullets up and looks at it. And then all of them fall. And that's what I feel like that interrupt that you're talking about is. It's like you stop and you pick the thing up and you're like, why was this concerning me?
Right. It loses its power.
Yeah.
Right. So that thought that could penetrate you and make you feel ashamed or less or limited, that thought no longer, either it just never doesn't even turn up anymore, or when it does, here's another little metaphor, less relevant in today's society, but in the old days, you move house and you'd get mail. We call it post over here. You get mail for the people who were there before. So it comes through your mailbox, but it's not for you, right? So it doesn't matter what the mail is, it's not for you. It's still coming into your space, but it's like, oh, that's not me. So when we have a shift in realization, that we still might have the same thought, but it has no power because it's not about you, because you see there is no you for it to be about. Whereas in the previous, it was personal, it was self-identified with, and that's the joy. And then actually over time, once you stop self-identifying, the thoughts don't even come in. The bullets stop raining at you, because if they only come at you when you resist them, right? So whatever you resist persists. So once you stop resisting the bullets, not only can they not hurt you, they don't even turn up, right? And the mind just gets quieter. And then we see fresh. But the key in all of this that I think is so fascinating and actually is really direct and way less complicated than all the other therapeutic ways we try to get to what we're talking about, is to see the one thing, is to see, oh, what am I truly? What am I truly before my psychology? What am I before the self has created this idea that I'm this separate me? And we can check that out in any moment of any time for any of us, just by going into the direct inquiry and going, okay, right now, if I don't pay attention to me being this self that with these perceptions and these, there's something that's there before. We get just an essence of it, a flavor of it. You can't even describe it really, because as soon as you describe it, you've put form around it. That's what we are. And that, you could call it consciousness if you wanted to, in the bigger sense of the word. I just tend to call it, we're the capacity for the system. We're the sky, not the weather. So if you won't go to a visual metaphor, the sky's always there. And it doesn't care what the weather's doing. It doesn't care if it's cloudy or rainy or snowy or sunny or hurricanes. And does it get damaged? Does the sky get damaged by the rain or the clouds or the snow? No. But normally we merge the sky and the weather into one thing, and we just look outside the window and go, well, there's the weather, right? And it's the same as we do in our human experience, is we've so fused the self and the psychology of thought, feeling, and perception with this essence of what we are before. We don't really see they're two separate things. We think they're the same. Like right now, you're looking at a Zoom screen and you're probably seeing me and a picture of you on the screen, and you don't recognize there's a screen and a picture. They're just merged.
Yes.
And when we see, oh, right, what I truly am, the thing that never changes about me, is the screen or the sky, depending on which metaphor you're using. But what I thought I was all the activity on the screen or the activity in the sky, which is the weather. And that's what causes the resistance, and that's what causes the lack of flow.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I just it reminds me of, this is going to sound very strange, but have you ever heard the term nose blind?
No.
Yeah, okay.
I've heard of like some kinds of blind, but not nose blind. No.
So our bodies are designed that we can smell something when we initially smell it.
Right?
But how off-putting would it be, good or bad, that you continued to smell the same thing over and over again,
Yes, I
right?
see. I can see where you're going. Yeah.
So when you're in, like, I took my son to this cookie shop near our house recently. It smells heavenly in there, right? And every time I go in there, I'm like, if I worked here, I'd weigh 10,000 pounds. And because I love cookies. And everyone that works there, 'cause it's always different people, say, we don't even smell it.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of like our conditioning, right? It's like when we were children, you even mentioned this jokingly, but when you were a small child, everything was Technicolor.
Mm.
And then slowly but surely you're in an environment where everybody's like, no, you're not. Everything's gray. Come be gray. We're all gray. And you forget that there's color, but it's right in front of you. It's like
Yeah.
we're back to that sensory factor. And so you just made me think about how I think we walk around surrounded by these beautiful things, but we get conditioned to be nose blind
It
to it.
gets. I think it's a nicer metaphor than nose blind, and we get normalized. And sometimes there's a sort of a metaphor I help people see that we're in any moment we're in what I call an aperture,
Mhm.
right? And it's an aperture that expands and contracts. It's a metaphor, but if you just go with it for a moment. Now, when it contracts, it looks like there's a me here, an Emily or a Piers, and a world out there, and the world can do things to me. Go back to your bullets. They can get me, and
Mhm.
I need to be a better me to deal with this world. And it can feel lonely, stressed, pressured. You have to strive a lot. You've got to be on the hamster wheel. And that's the contraction. Now, when we're in a more expanded aperture, we get a sense there's something bigger, wider, more intelligent, more wonderful driving the system, like you did when you had your experience of letting go of everything, right? And it opens up, and you see the beauty around you quite literally. So that tree you've been driving past to work, and you never
Mhm.
noticed, suddenly you see, oh, that's a beautiful tree. Or you start noticing things you never noticed, and the juice from each moment goes up.
100%.
Right? So some of the normalization blindness drops away, and we just appreciate the small, ordinary things in life because that aperture is more expansive. And
Mhm.
actually, in that more expansive aperture, which is very similar to when we're in flow, there's less sense of me. Or if there is a me, it feels like the me is just coming through the system. And when we're in a more expanded aperture, we kind of see this. But what happens is, for a lot of us, our aperture is gently, invisibly, innocently being contracting down into our conditioning. And then it's forgot to tell us it's done that.
Mhm.
And we then go, well, that's what the world is, rather than realizing that's your aperture in the moment. Because in a different aperture, the world will look different. As you say, more technicolor, more joy, more love, more peace, more
Mhm.
possibility. But the aperture does such a job on us, it closes things down and then tells us that's the world outside of you, and you're limited.
Mhm.
And it doesn't say, oh, that's your aperture. Just like, but you can see it in kids even better, because kids' apertures change quite fast. So they can have a massive tantrum and, oh my gosh. And then 2 minutes later, they're like laughing and dancing and singing, and they can't even remember what they're upset about. Their aperture changes super fast. Ours gets contracted down. And the reason it gets contracted down is because of our conditioning that we are this separate self, that we start at me. And what we're doing before psychology is going, no, you don't. You start before that. And you never finish. You are the eternal, universal, consistent thing that is the capacity of consciousness. It's not like I have one and you have one. It's the same thing. It's we're all, if you take another metaphor, a visual metaphor for you, the water in the whirlpools. So we are all the water, but we individuate down into a whirlpool, into an eddy.
Mhm.
That whirlpool is still made of water. It's got
Yeah.
a different activity to the rest of the water, different frequency maybe, which can change on the aperture, but it's still made of the same stuff. So me and you are the same. We are the one consciousness, but we individuate into these individual whirlpools, which is why when we're in a really expanded aperture, we really sense I'm you and you're me. Namaste.
A
Right?
hundred
And
percent.
when we're contracted, it feels really separate. There's a world out there that's against me.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. It's just a different contraction or expansion. And the contraction expansion, the variable that I see that makes the huge difference is what we think we truly are.
Oh, that's so true.
Now, just because of time, let's just come back to because we've had a little conversation going into the woo-woo bits maybe. Let's come back to the secret source question. Right. So we started the conversation, we're going, what's the secret source?
Step one. I'm kidding.
Yeah, give me 5 steps, please. Yeah. So what is it truly that is the secret source? The secret source is seeing where the self avatar, that I call it, has created this very amazingly vivid story and narrative and perception of what you are and what you need to be, and is trying to follow that. And when you see through that,
Mhm.
by seeing that you're something more than that, and you can do that through direct path inquiry, that's the easiest way I know. There are other ways, but they take longer, they're indirect. That falls away, and the freshness comes in, and you realize that there's the wind behind your sails. And it doesn't start with you. You are an
Yeah.
appearance. Now,
A hundred
what do you
percent.
make of all of that?
So something that I had to do a lot when I first awakened, if you will,
Mm,
was consistently remind myself. And it was something I would do. I mean, when I first started figuring this out, I did it probably 3 or 4 times a day. Now I only do it once a day. Um, and I just start with, how do I want to feel? And I have to say that because that's sort of a grounding thing for me. Cause it's like, oh, I get to choose. It's like it
mm,
awakens me every day. And I do it when I wake up. And
yeah,
what's interesting is based on the words I choose, I usually choose like 3 or 4, is exactly what I see that whole day.
yeah. Haha. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, I think what's going on there, it's really interesting when people say things like that, because that to you is your little mini ritual,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That
Mhm.
that is, I think, pointing you back to see something way beyond the words you're using, and actually the words are a slight, almost inconvenience in that, because what you're actually seeing is my guess, because of the way you've explained it experientially, is you're actually looking at what am I, not the what am I this or that, am I happy or sad, or how do I want to feel? Do I want to feel angry or jealous or joyful or compassionate? Or the after bit of that sentence, the second part, irrelevant, right? The actual bit is who am I, or what am I, or what is this I? What I mean by that, we get fascinated on the content, which is the happy, sad, the content of the feeling and emotion. I want to feel this. I want
Mhm.
to feel complete. I want to feel peaceful, or I don't want to feel angry, or I don't want to feel this. That's the wrong part of the sentence to focus on. To me, the bit to look at is what is the I that thinks it needs to feel a certain way?
Mhm.
Is that I avatar Emily? Short answer, yes, because the true I wouldn't care what it felt. The Emily avatar is trying to control feeling a certain way and thinks it has choice, which it doesn't. I've got loads of podcasts on free will. There's no choice. So the real question is, you go to the beginning of that sentence and you ask yourself a question: what is aware right now? Who is this I that I think is in the world?
Mhm.
And if you answer that question directly, you will go to something before Emily that actually you can't really explain, and there's no answer. The
And
actual
it's
answer is
exactly,
silence.
yeah. It's exactly why I ask it, because it, back to what you were saying before, the contraction and the expansion,
Yeah.
it instantly puts me in expansive thought.
Exactly. So that's your little method, if you want to call it,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
go back, what I call back to pre
hmm
the Emily. Now,
hmm
other people, so the way you do that is irrelevant because that's just your little
Of course. Yeah.
thing. And actually, it's nothing about what you feel. It's nothing about I want to feel this, I want to feel that. It just takes you back to expansion because once you're
Exactly.
in expansion, everything takes care of itself. When you're expansion, you don't really care what you feel in a lovely way. There's just a richness in all feelings, right? So you can feel
So true.
what I would call high quality of mind sadness. You just feel alive
hmm
to the wind and the snow and the this and the that. And so it's actually, once you're in expansion, the system stops trying to control what it feels. Just like a 2-year-old does not care whether it's happy or sad.
Mm.
They just have a rich experience of both. Now we say, hey, stop crying, stop doing that. It's embarrassing when you cry in the supermarket, in the grocery store. But at our essence, every experience is a richness of whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what you're recognizing in that little moment in your day when you go back to expansion is, oh, yeah, I'm not the Emily I thought. I'm not constrained by that. I am the essence.
Yeah.
But then we overcomplicate that. Oh my gosh, we overcomplicate that by trying to downstream do things with our psychology to get back to that very ordinary, extraordinary, as you said, thing. So there we go. So we could carry this conversation forever. How would you put a little bit of a bow on this and maybe sum it up for people?
The only thing I can reach to is my own experiences, just because this is what helped me. And it was letting go of reason and logic.
Mm,
If
that's
I let go of reason and logic, I'm already more expansive.
mm,
And that has helped me so much. Any time I've, back to your point, held on to something or resisted it, once I let go of reason and logic, I can see much more clearly what needs to happen.
yeah, yes. And you know what I hear in that? When you let go of reason and logic, what I hear in that is you're letting go of that self-identification, which tends to, well, particularly for you, manifest itself in reason and logic, right? Now, that doesn't mean in the freshness that comes through, the obviousness that comes through, there isn't also reason and logic, but it's coming from a
100%.
very different place. You're almost letting go of your narrative of the self. And when you let go of that, the flow and ease comes through. So
Yes.
reason and logic is your kind of way of, a bit like what you do in your day when you say, well, how do I want to feel? That's your just little method to see something about what you truly are.
It's almost like, for anyone listening, how do you identify? Do you identify yourself as pretty? Do you identify yourself as smart? How do you identify yourself? And then say, I'm going to let go of that. Like,
Yeah.
let go of it, because that really reason and logic. And so when I say that, that's really me letting go of exactly what Pierce was just saying.
And actually go further back. So yes, and go further back. Let go of the thing that needs to identify with anything. So rather than just go, oh, I'm not going to identify with being pretty or smart
Yeah.
or clever or learned or step driven, I'm going to go back to see that I haven't got to be a better avatar. I haven't got to be an avatar that lets go of things. I've got to see I'm not even the avatar, or the avatar is just an avatar, right? So I haven't got to self-identify with the right things rather than the wrong things. Oh, self-identify with this, not that. No, go pre the idea there is anything solid and permanent that needs to self-identify. And then that frees you up from moving from I need to have a better story about who I am to I don't need a story about who I am because I am not anything fixed. Stop self-identifying with your inner.
Yeah.
The only thing we want to see that we are is this absolutely empty at one level space that is the capacity for all the content, has no thoughts to identify in whether they're internal or external. So it's going, yeah, okay, I don't want to identify with my external world, quite right, but I don't want to identify with my internal world. Now, I had about 10 years of doing positive psychology and NLP where I wanted to have positive thoughts, positive mindset. That's way better than having a negative mindset or negative thoughts or attaching my well-being to my success externally. But I was still self-identifying internally about having the right kind of me. I now don't care what kind of me shows up because I know it's not what I am. Now, in different games of life, contextually, of course, there's a better me, there's a more appropriate me than a less appropriate me, depending on what I'm up to, but it's not what I am. So I've gone from identifying less with the external world to trying to identify with the internal world of me to now saying, oh, even that is based on the avatar. So go back even further. And that to me has been the game changer. And that's the secret sauce.
Amen. I completely agree with everything you just said. And I think that's where we miss it.
Yeah. We forget that we are everything and nothing. And we have to just really go back to what are we? What are we at our essence? And that's a hard thing to see if we ask our avatar self, because it thinks it starts when we were born and it ends at the end of our fingers and it's separate to the world. And it isn't. And when we see that in the practical land of business and entrepreneurship, it flies. Emily, anything else you'd like to say as we wrap up now for time?
Come find me, not me, just the come find me. And I think it's exactly the everything and nothing kind of thing. Who is that? I don't know. Go find out. That sentence to me gets me every time. It's almost like looking in a mirror. You know, when you look in a mirror and there's a mirror behind you and all you see is this mirror near, it's like that to me. So.
Oh yeah. Well, we might just leave it on that lovely image that I have anyway. I hope you do too, listeners, of just knowing there's more than what presents itself, the different layers of the mirror, and it just seeing through that, and that comes to you in life when you're in this flow. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being a great fellow conversation and listener. I'll put Emily's details in the show notes if anyone wants to reach out and say hi or contact you, and we'll do all that. So listeners, as usual, have fun being curious and catch you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and want to know more, check out our website at qualityofmind.biz. And also feel free to reach out and leave us a review or a comment. Until next time, have fun being curious.